Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson. We're brought to you by Fantrax today, and the top 400 prospect rankings are live on the site, fully updated. The team top 20 prospect rankings are fully updated, and the dynasty rankings are fully updated, all within the past week. Rotowire.com/pod if you want to check those out. And remember, you're not getting the full value of the prospect or the dynasty rankings if you're not syncing your leagues with the My Leagues feature so that you can quickly see the best free agents available in your league. I'd also just like to say thank you to all the people who came up and said hi in Vegas this past weekend. I feel like I was only sort of scratching the surface in terms of getting to say hi to people and catch up, but it was a great time, and I really appreciate everyone who came up and said something nice about my work or RotoWire. These high stakes leagues are so much fun, but incredibly challenging. This isn't a type of thing where people are like, how do you like your teams? And it's just like, I love all my teams. It's not like that, but I'm ready for the grind, and good luck to everyone this season. But we've got a bunch of questions. You guys asked a bunch of really nice prospect questions to do with the top 400 update. So let's get right into that. First one from Nevsim81 says, can you talk a little bit about the rise of Grant Taylor of the White Sox as a prospect from being drafted to the current hype train? He seems to have really jumped out of nowhere in a very limited sample size. Is this possibly the next Mason Miller, a quick riser, injury risk with huge stuff, or would that be a lazy comparison of Grant Taylor's ceiling? I actually do have some comps for Taylor, but I hadn't really considered Miller just because Miller, I felt, came with even more durability, health, bullpen risks at the same stage. But I do think it's an interesting one. So I'm glad you threw that out there, Nevsim. My comps for Taylor are just more of kind of where I sort of see his prospect value right now and where it could be in a short amount of time. And it brings me back to 2017 with Walker Buehler and Jesus Luzardo. They both had really small samples of excellence as they were just getting back from Tommy John surgery. And then that 2017 season, they both established themselves as elite pitching prospects. I think we could see Grant Taylor do that this year. Basically, if he just stays healthy, has a healthy season, I think Grant Taylor, like, all the ingredients are there. Bunch of plus pitches, chance for above average command. So there's a chance for Grant Taylor to finish the year as a top 3 pitching prospect, a top 25 overall prospect. So the White Sox with Burke at the big league level, Schultz, Hagen Smith, Grant Taylor, even Shane Smith at the big league level, a lot of intriguing high upside arms already coming up through the White Sox system there. Next question is going to be from Coco. He says, what caused the big jump for Angel Genao of the Guardians? So Angel Genao was one of the best shortstop prospects in the lower levels, but he came to camp this year, added significant lower body muscle in the off season, and actually grew taller. I don't know how much taller. It's probably like a half inch or an inch. But that aligns with kind of what I saw on tape with just the added muscle. He just looked like a more intimidating hitter in the box, and he already did everything else well. So, if Genao is a 20 homer shortstop, which I think is now kind of more of a realistic possibility than it was before he showed up to camp with all this added muscle, that would make him a potential 5 category fantasy shortstop. So, big year for Angel Genao at Double-A. I think he could finish the year as a top 10, top 15 prospect, something like that. Patrick Gilbert says there's a lot of buzz around Alan Roden at Jay's camp. I thought he may inch closer to the top 50 and would love your thoughts. I pushed Roden up into the top 90, I think, but I do regret not pushing him about 10 to 15 spots higher. I released the top 400 before Roden had officially made the team. And so that does kind of boost him up a handful of spots at least, just because I think you can now use him in 15-team mixed leagues. He went last night in 15-team main event that I was in. I took Roman Anthony a couple picks after Alan Roden went, which gives you kind of an idea of where Roden's going in redraft leagues. He's just a really well-rounded hitter. I would expect him to be a leadoff hitter, at least against righties, for a good chunk of his early to mid 20s. And I guess he's already in his mid 20s. But yeah, like during Roden's prime, he should be a leadoff hitter, at least against righties. And, you know, maybe you're dealing with kind of a Brandon Nimmo type of thing. Maybe it's better than that. Maybe it's like a Stephen Kwan with a little less speed. Maybe there's more power there than that. But I still don't see a crazy high ceiling with Roden. He's really just kind of come on because of his hit tool, but not a guy that has, you know, plus power or plus speed. He might be able to just make the most of everything and be a 15, 20 homer guy, 10 to 15 steal guy, ton of runs, nice batting average. But yeah, I regret not pushing Roden a little bit higher. Top 100 is a pretty nice vote of confidence, but yeah, I could have pushed Roden a bit closer to that top 50. Ross Redk says, I've never been a huge Chase Petty fan, Petty pitching prospect with the Reds, but I feel I've gone from the low man to the high man on him. Curious what's holding you back from moving him up, as I know you love proximity arms. Is it all park or some skill concerns? Yeah, Ross, I hear you on Petty. He's a tough guy to rank. I don't love the park, but my main reservation with Petty is just that the strikeouts have never really matched the stuff with him, or at least the theory of the stuff. We know he throws hard. We know he's got a full pitch mix, but he's struck out less than a batter per inning at every stop since he was at high A in 2023. And so he is a proximity arm, but he's not a guy that's been missing a ton of bats in the upper levels. But that could change like really quickly. You know, he could put the pieces together. The strikeouts could all of a sudden kind of match the stuff this year, and it would look like I was quite a bit too low on Petty, but I just kind of want to see him do it. He's teased me. I've had Petty higher than this, probably 100 spots higher than this before. And just the strikeouts just haven't been there the way I've expected. But he could break out, and this is still just his age 22 season, so he could be a double up arrow guy on the next prospect update, which will be right before Memorial Day weekend. Gordy Myers says, can you describe what you see in Emil Morales of the Dodgers that worries you? Why is he ranked well over 100 when other rankers are much more excited about him? Yeah, I can't speak to other rankers, but you know, historically for Emil Morales, who's only played in the Dominican Summer League, being ranked 150, which is where I've got him ranked, the spring after his Dominican Summer League debut, that would be seen as a pretty big vote of confidence. Historically, there are typically only one or two DSL guys who get ranked anywhere near the top 100. So that's not counting like a Leo DeVries who skipped the DSL. Right now, Emil Morales is behind Jesus Mate of the Brewers, Jairo Padilla of the Cardinals, among players from the 2024 J15 class who have only played in the DSL. He's also behind Yolfran Castillo of the Rangers, who split the year between the DSL and the ACL. There's definitely an argument for having Morales over Padilla and Castillo and closer to the top 100. And you got to remember, like, you know, being ranked 100, being ranked 150, that's really not that big of a difference. So, you know, if you want to value Emil Morales closer to 100, that's totally fine. My main reason I'm not pushing him up there is just his size. He's just really, really big for his age. He's 6'3". He's not going to be able to stick at shortstop. He might even outgrow third base in 4 or 5 years. Wouldn't really surprise me. He's just so big. I gravitate towards the guys with the more sort of projectable athletic frames that they can kind of grow into. And then I also don't expect Morales to be much of a runner compared to the other prospects we're talking about here with Amade, Padilla, Castillo, DeVries. I think Morales is going to run the least of those guys, so it's going to be all about his bat. Sometimes we see with these bigger sluggers when they get to high A or double A, the strikeouts just really spike. So just kind of being a bit more cautious with how far I push Morales up just because of how big he is. But yeah, I mean, if he comes to the ACL or single A this year and the strikeouts are in a really nice spot, he'll keep rising, but just not my archetype that I typically am going to push way up there off of the DSL. Composite, are you starting to lose some hope that Jett Williams of the Mets will return to his pre-injury form? So I'd probably phrase it a little differently. I'm just hopeful that Williams can have a healthy season. He hasn't had a healthy year, and he just hasn't even stayed healthy in the fall league where he's supposed to be making up for time. So I'm guessing the injuries and the rustiness have affected Jett Williams' performance to some degree here, but he's also he's so patient and passive at the plate, especially against poor arms that can't throw strikes, that we need him to play a lot to get to see a lot, because he's not swinging that often. He's not putting balls in play that often relative to most guys his age. So when he's only playing for a stretch of a couple of weeks, we're just not getting a ton of info from that. So I would just love a full healthy season from Jett Williams so that we can kind of see where he's at, because I just don't think we've been able to see where he's at because of all this lost time, because of all the stops and starts. Okay, let's head to a message from our sponsors. When we come back, I want to talk about a couple Royals hitters that I added to the top 400, one of them inside the top 200 on this most recent update. So stay tuned to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring systems, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more, and it's all free. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's FANTRAX.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. The NFBC RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Online Championship is live. Play fantasy baseball against your favorite RotoWire experts on NFBC this season. Jeff Erickson, Clay Link, and myself will be competing in the RotoWire NFBC Online Championship for a shot at $150,000, I should say. And I'm going to be doing my final RotoWire Online Championship right after the podcast here. So sign up for a draft today at rotowire.com/high stakes. That's rotowire.com/high stakes. Okay, Musculunge asked a great question here. Spencer Nivens of the Royals is not listed in the Baseball America top 30 for the Royals. Can you give me a scouting report? Yeah, so that's a great question. Spencer Nivens was just someone that I missed on the midwinter update, the January 15th update. But the reason I ranked Spencer Nivens around 200 on this update is really just based on his final 52 games of last season. And I'm not surprised that BA doesn't have him ranked because of just the tail of his season and his defensive limitations. But in his final 52 games at high A last year, Nivens slashed 327, 396, 678 with 18 home runs in those 52 games. He had a walk rate over 10%, a strikeout rate around 24% over that stretch. So Nivens is already 23. He's going to be making his AA debut this year, and he's a left fielder. So, you know, this is just a bet on the power, a bet on maybe him being a late blooming power hitter. We've seen this happen. You know, Kerry Carpenter comes to mind as a guy that people just didn't really take seriously as a prospect until it was too late. You know, I think I added Kerry Carpenter, you know, early enough that you were able to go get him. But, you know, Nivens could be another guy like this where he's just left field / designated hitter. You know, maybe they can't find a spot for him, but, you know, you hit 18 home runs in 52 games. That's pretty notable. And he had a good spring in a small sample too. So Spencer Nivens, potentially a late blooming power hitting prospect in the Royals system, who will be heading to Double-A this year. And on a related note, I've never been a Gavin Cross guy. Cross was a first rounder for the Royals a few years ago out of Virginia, I believe. But I added him to the top 200 on this update, as I'm starting to think he could play enough in 2026 to maybe go 2020 or 15-25 as the Royals right fielder. Cross's defense and draft pedigree, I think, it's just gonna buy him the opportunities, and I kind of think the Royals are going to pencil him in as a guy that's going to take over in right field in the not too distant future. And I think I didn't give him enough credit as someone whose glove was going to buy him playing time and who was actually going to run. Gavin Cross, the speed wasn't a big part of the selling point coming out of the draft, but I also just think the bat's been light enough on impact that he's had to find other ways to impact the game. So Gavin Cross, now a guy that could steal 20 plus bases in 2026 and be playing pretty much every day. So interesting, kind of a late breakout by Gavin Cross after not living up to expectations first couple of years in pro ball. Frappy, who has the better year of high school teammates Jacob Wilson and Max Muncy for the Athletics? Well, Muncy for me, although of the two, Muncy would be the one who could get optioned to AAA with a slow start. I think Wilson is just kind of up for good, and his type of game, he's not going to get too high, he's not going to get too low, he's going to put a bunch of balls in play. Muncy is the one that actually has upside worth investigating in fantasy. He's got more power, significantly more power than Jacob Wilson, more power potential in 2025. He's also got more upside as a base stealer, although I don't think either of these guys are going to be 20 steal threats. But if one of them stole double-digit bases, I would bet on it being Muncy. And I mean, that is kind of damning with faint praise. But again, Muncy, he's just got more juice. Wilson's going to hit for an empty batting average. Dale Teeks, do we see Agustin Ramirez of the Marlins in the majors by May? Is this just a case of not starting his service clock too soon? When he gets the call up, does he move into the top 5 to 10 catchers for rest of season projections? So yeah, I think this is textbook service time manipulation, what the Marlins are doing with Ramirez here. He was obviously good enough in the spring to make the team. He's probably already one of the 3 or 4 most impactful hitters they are capable of putting in their lineup. But he wasn't going to be a very realistic contender for NL Rookie of the Year. He's a bat first player. He's not a great defensive catcher. I think a decent amount of his playing time, even this season, is going to come at first base and designated hitter. So it would have been unlikely for Ramirez to win NL Rookie of the Year. So then the incentives for the team kind of shift to the more ugly way of manipulating service time, where they just keep him down for a couple of weeks, bring him up mid-April, and then they get an extra year of control. So 7 years of control if they do that instead of 6. I wouldn't say top 5 to 10 catcher right away from a rest of season projection standpoint, but Ramirez has the upside to be a top 10 catcher once he's up. And he's someone who should be rostered in every 2-catcher league once he's up. I even think you could roster Ramirez right now in 15-team 2-catcher leagues, just under the assumption he'll be up in a couple weeks. And once Ramirez is up, I think if he comes up in mid-April and he stays up, I think Ramirez can lead all catcher-eligible players in stolen bases while hitting double-digit homers. So he's an appealing option if you went cheap at catcher. Matthew King, which prospects outside your current top 100 have the best chance of being top 10 by season's end? So always get a question like this with each prospect update. Don't mind it at all. But obviously a big qualifier here is that the players I like most are already in the top 100. So like if you're looking for like a young player with upside that I really believe in and really think has a great chance of climbing high in the rankings, they're probably already in the top 100. But to your question, Slade Caldwell of the Diamondbacks, Yairo Padilla of the Cardinals, Kellen Lindsay of the Dodgers, Josuar De Jesus Gonzalez of the Giants, Yolfran Castillo of the Rangers, Emil Morales of the Dodgers, Griffin Burkholder of the Phillies, Rainiel Rodriguez of the Cardinals, and Yorger Bautista of the Mariners are the players that I think have the best chance of being top 10 by season's end, who are not in the top 100. You'll notice that they are all position players because there's not going to be a pitcher that's not in my top 100 who finishes top 10. And they are all position players who are, I think, 19 or younger. Certainly, they all have very limited pro samples or no pro samples to speak of, because for you to go from outside the top 100 to inside the top 10 by season's end, you basically need to be a player who's kind of showing us everything for the first time, or showing us everything stateside for the first time. If you spent all of last year at like single A or high A or something, you're not going to go from outside the top 100 to inside the top 10. And I will, as always, be doing an article version of this. So if you want those names, just be on the lookout for that article. It'll go up shortly after the pod. CPAR says, thoughts on Sal Frelick for this year. Brewers O looking good this spring. I am a big fan of Joey Ortiz and also have some Rhys Hoskins as my second 1B. All right, yes, CPAR, Frelick is having a nice spring, but kind of like with Jacob Wilson of the Athletics, both Frelick and Wilson had StatCast hard hit rates below 20% last year. The spring numbers are greatly going to oversell what is a realistic type of power output over a full season for Frelick and for Wilson. The biggest question with Frelick is whether he'll sit against lefties and whether he'll run a little bit more than he did last year. I think he could play a little bit against Southpaws early in the season, but that playing time probably dries up once Blake Perkins returns in about a month from his shin injury. So you're looking at a likely strong side platoon player in Frelick, who could eclipse the 18 steals he managed last year in 145 games. But, I think you get maybe a decent average, 5 to 10 homers, 20 to 30 steals. You're basically just buying the steals from a player who's not going to hurt your batting average. I do think he's going to be a pretty big negative in RBI, pretty big negative in home runs. So more of a late round, deeper league option for me, Frelick, just because of the fact I expect him to sit against lefties most of the year and don't expect him to hit double-digit home runs. John Burley says, why is Zyhir Hope of the Dodgers a faller? Have you changed your evaluation of him, or is he more just getting passed by guys performing well in spring with closer proximity? I had a couple questions about Hope, but John nailed it with the reasoning here. Nothing has changed about Hope beyond the fact that he didn't do anything to improve his stock this spring. So like with a guy like Hope, we saw it with some of the guys who are now ranked ahead of Hope. You're capable of going to spring training and increasing your stock in a small sample, playing in big league games. But, Zyhir Hope, he didn't hurt his stock by not performing, but he also didn't kind of keep pace with the guys that are rising. So, Cam Smith, Nick Kurtz, Jac Caglianone, those guys passed Hope. Hope didn't fall behind them. They just passed him. So nothing has changed about Hope, although he didn't speed up his timetable. We'll say that. Dave Slick says, everybody loves Kristian Campbell of the Red Sox, but doesn't his spring bother you? Yeah, I did. I lowered Campbell a few spots. I was tempted to lower him a few more spots. There's a tier on this update. I think this is important. This is the most important tier to mention on this update is from 4 with Jason Dominguez to 19 Samuel Basayo. So, Campbell's in that tier. He's high up in that tier at number 7, but I considered having him more in kind of the middle of that tier. If you wanted to take a Walker Jenkins or Leo DeVries or Dylan Cruz over Kristian Campbell, I wouldn't fault you for that. he's just the bigger concern for me than just what he did at the plate this spring is just that his defense at second base is worse than I realized kind of coming into spring training. So just the fact that the Red Sox have as much depth as anyone, and the fact that Campbell's defense is poor, that's kind of more what I lowered him a couple spots for than what he did at the plate. But he didn't do anything at the plate in the spring to kind of excite me or get me to be more interested in drafting him, that's for sure. Jordan Grieve, another guy I got a couple questions about, says he loves the Zach Fruit debut slot for the Orioles. I debuted Orioles pitching prospect Zach Fruit around 200 on the top 400. And Jordan says, any chance you think Zach Fruit debuts this year? And do you know anything about his pitch mix other than the high heat? Had another question asking for kind of a scouting report on Zach Fruit. So yeah, Zach Fruit, I think we could see him up this summer working out of the bullpen, and then they could maybe stretch him back out for 2026. Or they could maybe leave him in the bullpen if it's a huge success. I'm ranking him under the hope that he's able to stick as a starter, maybe gets his feet wet as a big league reliever this year. But, he got ranked because of how impressive he was in a small sample in spring training this year. And then also you look back at what Fruit did in 2024, and it's pretty impressive. In the spring game where there was StatCast, Fruit threw a 91 mile an hour cutter, which touches 94 miles an hour 26% of the time. He threw an 82 mile an hour sweeper 18% of the time. And that's in addition to his 98 mile an hour four seamer, which touches triple digits, and his 96 mile an hour sinker, which he also mixes in quite a bit. So the sweeper and the cutter each got whiffs 2/3 of the time in that outing. So just a big time power arsenal for Fruit with the two fastballs plus the cutter plus the sweeper there. The walks were a little bit of an issue at high A last year, but obviously big time power arsenal. So I like the trajectory for Zach Fruit as a high upside guy to add right now in dynasty leagues. I've added him myself in a few spots, so he throws so hard that obviously there's risk of Tommy John surgery at any point, but Fruit is a big time up arrow pitching prospect in the Orioles system. All right, Matthew King says, what do you see as the stat line in the peak seasons of Roman Anthony of the Red Sox and Junior Caminero? Even though he has graduated, these are the two most commonly requested players off of Matthew's roster in trade. So peak Roman Anthony, I think he could be a corner outfielder who produces similarly to Bryce Harper, just with tons of walks, 30+ homer power, double-digit steals. I would expect Anthony to steal closer to 20 bases early in his career, while he kind of slowly gets to that 30 homer power over a full big league season. But yeah, peak Roman Anthony, I think, will be kind of similar to Bryce Harper, just in the outfield. And then Junior Caminero, his upside is like 35 homer hitter annually, hitting around 270 for batting average, OBP around 350, zero speed on the bases. So, kind of like a Rafael Devers type of fantasy output is what I would expect from Caminero if he reaches his ceiling. And Danny J says, Brady House of the Nationals got double up arrows. What are you seeing? Well, a 4-4 K to walk in 26 plate appearances this spring is pretty encouraging for House. All he needs to do is control the zone a bit, and he can be a 25 homer third baseman. Last year, he was completely lost from a swing decision standpoint at AAA. We wanted to give him a second chance here at AAA, see how he does. The early returns in spring training, just the fact that he was at least willing to be a little patient, just as many walks as strikeouts, encouraging for House. He's still young. But Jose Tena also hasn't ascended to the top of the depth chart like I expected there at third base, with Paul DeJong seemingly kind of beating him out. So House is, he could be up in the first half if he's raking, assuming that Paul DeJong doesn't take that job and run with it. But it's been an encouraging spring training for Brady House. Mark Vogel says, you've commented that this class doesn't have the top tier prospects other classes have had. Do you still feel the same way? So the biggest thing that was clear to me on this update was that I was too low on the 2024 draft class. And it's basically just because 4 guys all showed about as well as they possibly could this spring. And those 4 guys are Cam Smith, Jac Caglianone, Nick Kurtz, and Connor Griffin. Caglianone, Smith, Kurtz, all in the top 15 now after not being, I think only Kurtz was top 25 before this update. But yeah, so if you have 4 players at the top of the draft that have up arrows next to their names, essentially, on this update, I think Connor Griffin only went up 8 spots, so he might not have an up arrow. But just those 4 guys having as strong of a month as they had basically has led me to conclude that I was too low on this class, at least as things stand right now. We've had such a bad run of college hitters and especially first basemen underperforming in pro ball. And that's ultimately, it's decided at the big league level, right? Like it's not this class hit on college guys. Like they haven't hit yet because they haven't done it at big league level, but so far it would seem that this class is going to be a trend reversal rather than a continuation of that trend of all these high pedigree college hitters essentially flopping in pro ball. Billy Hay says, do you like Cam Smith over Kristian Campbell for fantasy this season? I like them about the same for 2025. So positional need would factor in. Do you want the second baseman? You want the Cam Smith is eligible at third base right now. Going to add outfield eligibility. Cam Smith's rise in the rankings to me was more about the next 3 to 5 years than just the short term. Like I jumped him up. Part of what led to him making the opening day roster is just what jumped him up, but I didn't jump him up because of how excited I am about the fantasy output Cam Smith's going to give us in the first couple months of 2025. We saw, last year, Wyatt Langford, much better prospect than Cam Smith, and Wyatt Langford had a pretty slow start to his pro career. So I don't think Cam Smith or Kristian Campbell, either of them are going to have monster fantasy seasons. But I do think you'll see probably both of them come on strong in the second half as they've had time to adjust. And then similar question. He says, how do you compare Cam Smith to Jasson Dominguez? How high is the ceiling? Very different players. Dominguez is a pretty good bet to go 2020 this year, as long as his glove doesn't cost him playing time. And Cam Smith probably won't ever go 2020 this year or any year. And, but I do think Cam Smith can be a 280 hitter who hits like 30 homers with a bunch of runs, bunch of RBI during his peak seasons. I don't think Dominguez is ever going to be a 280 hitter. So just very different statistical profiles as prospects. I think they both have pretty bright futures. It'd be nice if Dominguez could kind of just be passable in left field so we don't have to worry about that anymore. It might have just been the Florida sun hurting Dominguez on some of those gaffes out there. But I would definitely take Dominguez over Cam Smith in 2020 or 2025. And then it's pretty wide open between which of those two you'd prefer for 2026 and beyond. Kevin Farrow says, what put Jac Caglianone of the Royals slightly in front of Nick Kurtz? And then Tom Pallister, similar question. He says, I have 2 first base options in my ultra draft. I know you think highly of Nick Kurtz, and it seems you have Jac Caglianone right there with him now. Lean one way or the other. This is a very challenging one for me. Caglianone versus Kurtz. I struggled with which one to put ahead of the other. And I'd almost be tempted to advise a stranger to take Kurtz because of how safe his skill set is and how quickly he'll be up in the big leagues, health permitting. But if I were personally on the clock in a dynasty league, I would chase Caglianone's 50 homer upside, accepting that his floor is lower than Kurtz. And so I just ranked Caglianone ahead of Kurtz because that's what I would do. But I want to just kind of let people know Caglianone has a lower floor than Nick Kurtz. The only knock on Kurtz is that he has missed time here and there with just nagging injuries. Small stuff, though. That's really the only knock on Kurtz. And Caglianone, though, on the flip side, has just a much more impressive physique. It doesn't come with any durability concerns. And I think Caglianone is improving before our eyes as a hitter. And Nick Kurtz is just kind of the same awesome hitter that he's always been. So I lean very, very slightly towards Caglianone there, but I'm sure you can tell by how much I'm couching this. I think it's totally a toss-up. If I was on the clock, I think I'd go Caglianone. All right. Keith says, I've got an AL-only minor league draft next week and have the first pick. If Kristian Campbell of the Red Sox makes the opening day roster, I can't take him. Is there an argument for Travis Bazzana of the Guardians for you, or is it clearly Nick Kurtz? Well, since it's AL only, it would clearly be Camp Smith for me. But then if you passed on Camp Smith, it'd be between Kurtz and Caglianone. So Bazzana wouldn't factor into it for me. I think he's perfectly fine. For me, I think his upside is a little lacking compared to these other guys. But this is also a good time to mention that there's a new feature on the top 400. You're not going to be able to take Kristian Campbell, Keith, because he did make the team. But if you didn't already notice, you can now isolate just first-year player draft players on the top 400, or exclude the first-year player draft players completely from the top 400. So that way you can kind of keep up to date with the latest ordering of my first-year player draft ranks without me having to go in and constantly update those. And then that's also going to be a great feature for when the 2025 draft happens and I'm adding all of these guys that you can't pick up in most of your dynasty leagues. You'll be able to just exclude those guys from the top 400. Nebsim81 says Coby Mayo of the Orioles from inside the top 10 to outside the top 20 currently. Is it just fatigue of ranking him, or is something giving you reason to be a little less less optimistic about his realistic ceiling? Coby Mayo, I'm not less optimistic about his realistic ceiling. I'm just less optimistic about his realistic floor. He didn't give the Orioles really any reason to keep him around deep into spring training. And that's got to be seen as just at least a slight disappointment for this guy that we're always saying is blocked. The fact that he didn't even make it an interesting decision for the team this spring after also failing in the small sample of the majors last year. It's just we've kind of seen him get a couple opportunities now. He hasn't really done anything with them. And Mayo is going to go back to AAA and mash, but there's nothing Mayo can do to improve his stock at AAA, and it's just tough to know when we see him again. If he comes up again and he's bad again in the big leagues, I don't know. It's iffy on just sort of what type of player Mayo is going to be. I do still see that high 4 category ceiling. It's just getting a bit more of kind of like that's his ceiling. That's not necessarily the most realistic outcome. And then you have guys who are younger. You have like Nick Kurtz, Jac Caglianone, Camp Smith. These guys are a couple of years younger than Mayo. They're looking like they're closer to being big league ready than Mayo. So of course he's going to get passed by those guys. Travis Pastor says, every time I look up minor league stats, Matt Wilkinson of the Guardians' name is usually atop the leaderboard among pitchers, yet he barely gets ranked on most lists. Is it just a matter of the fastball velocity topping out at 91 miles an hour? I considered including Wilkinson, and if you want to treat him as a top 400 prospect, I think that's perfectly fine. My main goal with Wilkinson is to make sure people are aware that he's not nearly as good as his numbers. So as long as you're aware of that and you're just going to kind of bet on the performance, I think that's fine. The fastball is troubling. We also just haven't seen him against AA hitters, so that'll tell us a lot. And then, and that's where he'll be hitting this year, I would expect, for most or all the season. And then you've also just got guys in his own system Guys like Michael Kennedy, Austin Peterson, who might be even better versions of Wilkinson. So, where the command, depth of arsenal over pure stuff. So yeah, he's a really tough guy to rank. But if you're rostering Wilkinson and you want to keep rostering him, I'd say by all means. Luke Anderson says, I'm curious of your thoughts on Chase DeLauter of the Guardians. Is now a good time to buy low with his stock trending down, or are you avoiding trading for him given the injury history? DeLauter, I'm a pretty big believer in players being injury prone, even if we can't always call that out before it's too late. But the data across other sports besides just baseball is that the biggest predictor of future injuries is past injuries, especially with anything in the lower body for athletes that are doing a lot of physical movement, and then also anything repetitive with arm issues with pitchers. And DeLauter's just been injured more often than he's been healthy at this point, and I wouldn't trade for him. I wasn't sure where to rank him, but if someone came calling looking to buy low on him off of your roster, I'd see if I could turn him into one of the prospects I've got ranked higher. He's just outside my top 75 now, DeLauter. So there should be someone you could flip him for if anyone comes calling. But not a buy low target for me, DeLauter. Danny J says, what will Felnin Celesten need to show you to get into the top 25? He just needs to play and perform, and he's done very little of the playing part since signing. So obviously he was great in 32 games as an 18-year-old in the Arizona Complex League, but he's supposed to be great in that situation. Remember, Celesten signed in the same class as Sebastian Walcott. So consider how much Walcott has done since signing compared to what Celesten's done since signing. And he's 19 this year, so he's, he should rake at single A. And if he does that, I'm sure he'll be top 25 soon enough. But I can't get there on top 25 with Celesten based on what he's shown us to date. Like, obviously you could dream on the tools, but he hasn't been healthy enough. He hasn't faced age appropriate competition enough. Mark Vogel, how closely do you track category totals while drafting? So this came in, I think, after I shared my main event from last night. A bunch of people thought I was light on power, and then I think someone tweeted the standings, and I was doing okay on power. I think I'm okay on power, but Mark wanted to know how closely I track totals while drafting. I'm not closely tracking categories while I draft using a software or anything like that. I'll roughly track steals, but I don't feel the need to track the other 9 categories while drafting. I've had more success doing it this way than when I used to enter every pick during a draft into the software. I think that's a great way. If that's sort of the way you want to draft, you want all that knowledge, sort of all that control. That's a great way to draft too. I focus much more on tiers of players I like at positions. So I'm keeping track of how many guys are left in certain tiers at certain positions. And I'm only considering about 60 to 70% of the player pool in the first place. And I think I know the players well enough to be hitting my categories appropriately. It's just more about drafting the right players, the players I want at the right spots. And if I draft enough good players and I know how to build a fantasy baseball roster, I just kind of trust the categories to be there. Luke Anderson said, I saw that Robby Snelling's average velocity was up in his spring, but noticed he has a down arrow next to his name. Why did he drop? And he also wants to know if Yonio Corrett of the Rays is droppable now with his injury. Snelling's velocity was up. It was a 1-inning burst for him, but he also had more walks than strikeouts total against big leaguers this spring. He's going to open back at Double-A. So, I thought this was a good spring for Snelling. Would have been to kind of hang around as a starter in camp, make a bit more noise. he didn't really even get to work as a true starter in camp. So, take that for what you will. But the fact he's going back to AA, we'll see. If he's mid-90s over 5-6 inning starts at AA while he's throwing strikes, he'll be a riser. But just didn't really show me enough. Your fastball velocity being up in a 1 inning showing in spring training doesn't really tell me that much. As for Kurtz, you could drop him just based on the 60-day IL aspect, especially if it's a league where you can add someone in my top 150 or so. Would not be surprising at all if Kurtz is headed for some sort of arm surgery. Beerbot says, maybe a few words on Sal Stewart of the Reds. Has had a nice steady incline since October 2023. Yeah, Stewart has just been a favorite of mine for a while, and now it seems like more people are kind of catching on. He's just such a good pure hitter, both for average and OBP, and I think a power breakout is obviously coming sooner than later with Sal Stewart. I don't put a ton into his stolen base totals. I think he's more of a 4-category hitting prospect than a 5-category one, but he can do a little bit of everything, and he could have second base and third base eligibility some years. So just absolutely love Sal Stewart's bat. He's just been very, very productive, completely in control of the strike zone at every stop he's been at. So I love Sal Stewart. I think he's in the top 40 now. It's me, Chris C. says, did you fade Rhett Lowder of the Reds due to injury or performance? Well, I had him ranked 134 before the injury, so I was already fading his fantasy utility. I think he'll be a better real-life pitcher than a fantasy pitcher due to the lack of Ks in the home park, Rhett Lowder. But then you throw in the elbow issue, and his main appeal, which is proximity, seems to be in jeopardy. So now he's just inside the top 200. Seemed like a natural move down for me there with Rhett Lowder. Mr. Met says, is Chandler Simpson of the Rays a fast Jacob Wilson? I would say Xavier Edwards is a fast Jacob Wilson because he can play shortstop. Simpson has been working on being playable in center field. But if Simpson could handle shortstop, he'd be ranked quite a bit higher because the playing time would be guaranteed. And Wilson also has notably more pop than Simpson, as crazy as that is to say. Like, Wilson could hit 8 homers this year, and any homer Simpson hits is going to be of the inside the park variety. So yeah, there's some notable differences there. If Simpson had Wilson's power and glove at shortstop, Simpson would be a top 30, top 25 prospect. Wotan says, thoughts on Sabin Ceballos of the Giants. I've read he's had a great spring swinging the bat. Is he legit worthy of a pickup in a 14 to 16 team dynasty league? That's a good call out on Ceballos. I did not consider adding him on this update, but I can see a case for valuing him in that sort of 250 to 400 range if you want. Couple issues though with Ceballos. He turns 23 in August, and he doesn't have any experience at AA yet, so he's going to have to rake at AA this year. And he also doesn't really have a clear defensive home, so it's just going to be a ton of pressure on Ceballos' bat at AA, at AAA, and his age is clock's ticking on Ceballos. So I could see valuing him as sort of a bat first, no speed type of guy that could hit his way into a first base or DH at bats. And then the last question we got from Matthew King. He says, Dynasty, Roto, keep forever, pick a side, Mookie Betts and Sebastian Walcott, or Wyatt Langford. I will go with Wyatt Langford. Bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, as they say. And at this point, I would take Langford over Betts just for 2025 due to the illness that Betts is dealing with. The weight loss just seems like Langford is safer than Betts based off what we know. He's going to run more than Betts, I think. And then I love Walcott. He's my number 1 prospect. But I just think you're getting such a guaranteed young star in Langford. And then for what it's worth, I wrote about the startup dynasty auction that I did with a bunch of familiar faces and names a couple months ago. in that startup dynasty auction, Betts plus Walcott went for a combined $43, and Langford went for $63. So there's auction dynamics that made that gap seem larger than it really is from just a valuation standpoint. But yeah, I don't think it's that controversial to say Langford over Betts plus Walcott in dynasty. So that'll do it for the RotoWire prospect mailbag, brought to you by Fantrax. And good luck this season, everyone.